Contentment with one's own mediocrity can be satisfyingly therapeutic, as we will soon see. Welcome, friends, to r/LifeofNorman. This entire subreddit is one collective story about a remarkably unimportant individual named Norman. We will be reading the top posts of all time today, and I truly hope that you will enjoy. Norman writes a hate note. Oh no. Norman had just gotten off work and began walking home when he noticed a car taking up 2 parking spaces in the parking lot of his favorite supermarket. Norman realized that he had blank post-it notes and a pen in his suitcase. Norman had never written a hate note before, and he worried that he might never get the opportunity to do so again. Norman didn't want to let this guy off lightly because he parked so inconsiderately, so he decided he would really let him have it in this note. Norman poured his anger out into the note, not letting himself hold back. "Please park more carefully," the note read. When Norman got home, his palms were still sweating, and the adrenaline kept him shaking. Satisfied with himself, he turned on CSI and leaned back in his chair. He still couldn't believe how boldly he acted, as that was completely unlike him. Norman came to greet Norman and lied down in his lap. "You wouldn't believe what I did today," Norman exclaimed loudly, as he pulled the note from his pocket out and showed it to Norman. "He didn't even leave the note? Oh, come on, Norman." And I don't understand how Norman comes and greets Norman. Like, is he disassociating right now? There's a lot of Norman lore that I'm sure we're gonna get to. And no matter how this video performs, I do want to continue doing it because some things are so spicy that it's kind of nice to have a big bowl of oatmeal to wash it all down, you know? Kid asks Norman for help. It was a very brisk day as Norman was walking to work. His car was having trouble starting again. As he passed the old Best Buy, he noticed a kite stuck in a tree and children looking at it and talking amongst themselves. Then Norman heard the kids yell in his direction, "Hey mister, we need your help!" But Norman stuck his hands in his pockets and began walking a little faster. Someone else will come along and help, Norman thought. Well, this story has deeper implications than one would initially expect. What's the comments say? Maybe we're all just kites stuck in trees, man. Or maybe we're Norman, bro, always walking past. Why not both? Passes blunt. Yeah, that's exactly the vibe of this conversation. But I don't know, it kind of makes you think. Norman buys some Coke. Oh my God, Norman, what are you doing with your life right now? Norman was grocery shopping when he decided to buy 2 cans of Coke. Not diet or caffeine-free, just regular plain Coke. He knew the sugar was bad for him, but he was feeling adventurous and wanted to treat himself. One for Saturday night and one for Sunday night, he thought. Saturday evening, and Norman is eating the takeaway that he has ordered from his favorite takeout. He fancies one of his Cokes. However, he already drank his Saturday Coke that afternoon while sitting out on his patio. He's thirsty, and he really does fancy a Coke. Better not, thought Norman. This Coke is for Sunday. That night, Norman's asleep by 10 p.m. Not having that second Coke was a good idea. Norman has an inordinate amount of self-control. Matter of fact, that might be the only extraordinary thing about him. God, I love Life of Norman. Norman yawns at work. Halfway through his day at work, Norman yawned. "Oh, don't start doing that," a coworker joked. Norman chuckled. "Yeah, I know. Rough night? You could say that," Norman lied. Norman didn't have a rough night. Norman had gotten 8 hours of restful sleep. Norman was just always a little bit tired. I identify with you there, Norman. I think there was a time in my life when I wasn't tired, but that was back in '95. I just ate a Ninja Turtles ice cream. It was the red dye number 7 that always gets me so worked up. I should strive to be more like Norman. Norman meets a friend. Norman decided to eat in the staff room today. There was a pretty girl that he had never seen before. He was too shy to speak to her. "Hello, what's your name?" the girl said. "Norman. What's yours?" he replied after a second of hesitation. Nora and Norman spoke for a while, mainly about things they enjoyed, and then the conversation came round to computers. Norman told Nora that when he was younger he used to open up Microsoft Paint and draw some squiggles and then color in all the spaces. Norman had never told anyone that before. Nora threw her head back and laughed. She said she used to do the same. She admitted that when she was bored, she still did this from time to time. Nora had never told anyone about this before either. The next day, just before his lunch break, Norman decided to put his report on hold so he could enjoy the whole half hour talking to Nora. When he got to the staff room, she wasn't there. "Where's Nora?" he asked Brian from accounting. Brian told him that she was only called in to fix someone's computer and that she wasn't actually employed there. Norman finished his break early and went down to his computer. He opened up Paint to draw some squiggles. It wasn't as fun as he remembered. He thought it was best that he finished his report. Dude. If you don't laugh, you'll cry. It's that sort of story. This is far too real. How are you tapping into my soul right now, Norman? He's the exact polar opposite to Chris Trucker, and I'm just loving it. Not safe for work. Norman sees something. Uh-oh. Norman was walking down the pet food aisle at the local supermarket when he spotted a puddle of water on the ground. What's worse, he watched a supermarket employee walk right past it without even noticing. That's not safe for work, Norman thought. No, it isn't. Lisa gives Norman a kiss. Oh no, but what about Nora? Oh, this is not good. Norman was thrilled. He didn't often get to eat chocolate at work. You're killing me right now. I'm literally dying inside. Norman calls his son. It was Saturday, and Norman hadn't spoken to his son in a while. He wondered how his son was getting along. Norman took the phone off its cradle and dialed. The line rang twice and went to voicemail. Norman never liked leaving messages. It always felt so impersonal. He hung up the phone. He's probably hanging out, having fun with his friends. Good for him, Norman thought. He contemplated calling again. No, I'd best not be a bother. Norman sat down to watch some golf on TV, waiting for his son to call back. He took a nap in his recliner while the TV droned. Norman woke up at 6 to the phone ringing. He picked up. "Hello, Mr. Norman. Are you satisfied with your long-distance service?" Well, he was, thank you very much. By the time 10 o'clock rolled around, it was time to go to bed, and his son still hadn't called back. But that was okay. Norman was happy to think that his son was out having fun with his friends. He wasn't offended that calling back had skipped his son's mind. Norman had had worse birthdays. Oh, not like this. You cut me deep. I wanted better for him, I swear. He's a precious soul. We all must gather to protect Norman. I mean, golf is the perfect sport for Norman to watch, but yeah, not on your birthday. You're supposed to go out to Buffalo Wild Wings or something. Norman would go to Hooters, but that has implications, right? No, best to stick to Buffalo Wild Wings. Norman sees something new at work. The packs of sugar next to the coffee machine at work were normally white, but today, some of the packs were yellow. Norman asked Lisa what those yellow packets were. "They're Splenda," she said. "They're like sugar, but with less calories." "I see," said Norman. He added 2 yellow packets into his coffee. His coffee was too lukewarm to fully dissolve the Splenda, and the granules grinded against his teeth as he took a sip. Norman didn't mind. He felt healthy. That night, he sprinkled extra cheese on his spaghetti. He deserved it. He really does. He can have as much cheese as he wants. I love you, Norman. You're a pure soul. Tell me more, please. I need more. Norman makes a steak for dinner. Norman had seen a TV show on how to prepare a steak properly. Norman followed the instructions that he had been given closely and made sure everything was exactly how they had told him to do it. When Norman was finishing up, he tasted it before he put it on the table and concluded with the fact that it was decent, but not as great as the people on TV claimed it was. Not exactly how Norman would have liked it, personally, but it was better than the steak that he slightly burned a couple months prior, and so he determined that his decision of making said steak was a good idea. Norman looks at Norman, whom begs for some food, but Norman is a cat. Oh, now it's all clicking. Cats shouldn't eat steak, and Norman wants to be a good pet owner and decides to keep the steak for himself. Because of this, Norman chose to eat the steak alone at his adequate dining room table. While eating, Norman thought of his job and how it would be to come back after the holiday season. A breeze of relief brushed over Norman as he remembered that he had made sure to be on schedule with his paperwork before he had left work for the Christmas celebrations. When Norman finished his meal, he came to the conclusion that the steak he made actually wasn't that bad after all, and then he made a point to cook it again at some point in the future. The end. I mean, that's one of the rules of life, Norman. Any steak is good steak. I don't care what it is, just put it in front of me. Let me shove it in my face. But that's not what Norman would do. He would use a fork and a knife and cut it into even pieces before he ate one piece at a time, dipping it in the sauce if he so desired, taking a sip of his water at regular intervals, as I hope you are as well, friends. Again, let's all try to be a bit more Norman. Norman gets a cheeseburger. It was Friday after work, and Norman felt like going out. He decided to go to his favorite burger place. Norman orders a double cheeseburger with no ketchup, onion rings, and an unsweetened iced tea. After receiving his order, Norman checks his burger to see if the order was placed right, and there was ketchup on his burger. Norman noticed that the restaurant, well, it looked super busy, and he didn't want to be a burden to the employees. Norman went home and scraped the ketchup off his burger and ate it anyways. Okay, I guess I found the one true weakness of Norman, and that's the fact that he just refuses to stand up for himself. Come on. The burger is worse because of the ketchup that's touched it. You didn't want ketchup. Go back in there and get no ketchup, Norman. You deserve it. Come on, baby boo. Norman goes into his office building. Norman was walking, as usual, to his building. Norman saw one of his coworkers walking toward the building as well. Norman noticed that their paces were the same, and they would reach the door at the same time. And so, Norman slowed down. He could have sped up to try and open the door for his coworker, but he wanted it to have it opened for him, which is quite telling of Norman. But as somebody who's as uninvested as I am with most things, I still identify with Norman at least a little bit here. Norman plays a video game. Norman sat in his chair, wondering how he would pass the time until tonight's airing of CSI. A thought came to him, and he decided to boot up his computer. The familiar Windows 98 logo flashed across the screen, and within a few minutes, he was ready to play his favorite video game. Norman knew that he was a little too old to enjoy video games, and typically didn't care for the excitement of the advertisements that he saw on television for them, but he was here, in his own home, with only Norman to judge him. And so, Norman opened up the Minesweeper program, and played 4 rounds, winning one of them. He then noticed that he had been playing for 15 minutes, and decided that that was enough for today. He shut down his computer, and returned to his chair. CSI would be on soon. Oh my god. I've never been good at Minesweeper. I do have to be impressed that he won once. Good for Norman. He deserves it. Norman and the spider. Norman was just about to get into bed when he saw it. A spider crawling on his wall near the ceiling. It was too high for Norman to reach, so he just watched as it crawled its way over to its web in the corner of the wall. Norman watched it for another 5 minutes before he decided that it was time for bed, or else he would be too tired tomorrow. Norman would leave the spider there for now. As Norman fell asleep, he thought more about the spider, how completely harmless it was. I should leave the spider alone. Leave it alone and call him Mike. Yeah, Mike. Mike the Spider. It's a nice name, thought Norman as he drifted off to sleep. Edit. I do realize I should have named the spider Norman instead of Mike. I was originally going to do that, but somehow ended up naming it Mike instead. Sorry if you guys don't like the name Mike. I don't just not like it. I hate it! I hope it does not become part of the canon. And based on newer posts that I've seen, it hasn't. Although, how much does a spider that lives in the corner of the wall really get the chance to come up in these stories? Could have been exciting, but you dropped the ball, OP. I will not hear the name Mike ever again spoken in this house. Do you understand? Anyways, moving on. Norman plays an MMO. Oh my god. Norman felt a little nervous as he loaded up RuneScape on his computer. He had never played an MMO before. He clicked through the opening screens to character creation. Enter character name, the system demanded. Norman carefully spelt out Norman into the white text box. The username Norman is already taken, the system informed him. That's a shame, Norman thought, switching off the monitor. But perhaps it's for the best, after all. It is for the best, Norman. You don't want to get involved in RuneScape, okay? There are worse communities out there, but I like you just the way you are. Stick to Minesweeper. Single player experience is best. Norman notices Lisa's curly hair. Norman peeked over the top of his cubicle to look at Lisa. Her hair was curled today, and as he sat at his desk, he stared at his monitor, pondering this sudden shift of routine and normalcy, and he wondered how he felt about it. He stood to walk to the water cooler, and as he passed, he confirmed that her hair was indeed curled. When he came back to his cubicle with a cup of water, he stopped in front of her and said, "Hey, Lisa." She turned around and said, "Oh, hey, Norman, how are you?" "I'm well, thank you. I noticed your hair looks different today." Lisa laughed, which alarmed Norman. "Well, this is actually my natural hair. I hate how curly it is, but I was too lazy to straighten it this morning, so it's normal today." Norman thought on this for a moment and said, "I like normal." Norman walked to his cubicle and reveled in his sudden courageousness, and his heart felt as though it might burst through his chest. He could not wait to recount this story to Norman when he got back home. Lisa looked at the reflection in her monitor and smiled. User LPN has the best comment here. Norman is exploring interesting territory here. He perceived her unusual/straight hair as the norm and was thus frightened when her normal/curly hair emerged. In other words, Norman was more comfortable with the reality that wasn't normal because he falsely believed that it was normal. So what is normal? Are we all like Norman in that we choose riskier options in life under the false belief that they are actually the normal default choice? And if that's the case, how do you even begin to measure risk? Norman is going to keep me up tonight. That's what he does. He's simple, but he makes you think, you know? Norman flips his pillow over. Norman woke up in the middle of the night feeling hot and uncomfortable. For some odd reason, he remembered the mail clerk in his office saying that his new girlfriend was, quote, cooler than the other side of the pillow. Norman flipped his pillow over. It is a bit cooler, Norman thought before drifting back to sleep. Good night, Norman. Good night. Norman is young again. A prequel. I think he's dreaming about this. Great work tonight, son. I know you'll ace your arithmetic examination tomorrow. Norman's father smiled as his son packed up his books to be ready for the next day. They'd studied together after dinner for at least 2 hours. Norman liked to make sure that his son was well prepared. As his son made his way to his bathroom to brush his teeth, Norman rinsed his coffee cup to put it away for the next morning. He glanced at the clock in the kitchen. 10:08 p.m. He was getting a little more worried about his wife. She said she'd have some errands to run after work and was then going to have dinner with a friend. Still, 10 o'clock is later than usual for her, though she had been out late a little more frequently as of late. Norman just hoped that she was safe. Norman awoke to the sound of the front door opening. He heard his wife put her purse down and then turn on the shower. Norman knew her mornings were hectic, and so he thought it was only prudent of her to shower tonight. He liked her efficiency. He glanced at the clock. 12:13 a.m. When she climbed into bed, Norman asked her if everything was okay. "Yeah, it's okay, just some car trouble after dinner. Don't worry, hon," she said, her back to him. Norman slid close to her. He hugged her and then kissed her on the shoulder. "Well, I'm glad everything's doing okay. Junior should do very well on his arithmetic test tomorrow. He's really smart." She didn't respond. Norman supposed she must just be exhausted after her car trouble and gone to sleep already. Norman settled his head into the pillow and smiled as he held his wife. Norman had everything that he had ever wanted right here under this roof. A beautiful and loving wife and a bright, jovial son. Norman was happy. For the people that didn't catch it, Norman's dad's wife has been cheating on him. That's why she wanted to have the shower when she came home. Oh, this is just too much feels for me right now. Come on. She doesn't deserve you, Norman. Why can't you see? And of course, this is the part that Norman chooses to dream about rather than the messy divorce. The endless fallout. Oh, speaking of which, hey, next story. Norman wins a copy of Fallout 4. As Norman paid for his groceries, the smiling lady behind the checkout said, "Don't forget, you can enter the code on your receipt for a chance to win Fallout 4 if you visit our website." Norman smiled as he grabbed his bags. Joking, he said, "I'm sure I won't. Have a nice day." He placed the receipt into his wallet, not to save it to enter the competition, but because it's always good to keep track of expenditures. Norman arrived home to be greeted with a meow from Norman. Hello to you as well. After putting away his shopping, he decided to relax in his armchair and watch CSI. In the break, an advert came on for Fallout 4, and Norman watched with interest. Perhaps I should enter that competition, he thought to himself. He grabbed his laptop and followed the instructions on the receipt. "Congratulations, you've won!" flashed up on the screen. Norman smiled to himself. The last time he had won anything was a Christmas raffle years ago. He entered his address details and closed the laptop. 3 weeks later, Norman had forgotten all about winning the competition until a parcel arrived at his door. He opened the package and inside was Fallout 4. Norman had already had lunch and had no plans for the Saturday afternoon, so he decided that he would watch Fallout 4, despite not having seen the first 3. He put the disc into his DVD player and waited. Error, disc not recognized. Norman looked at the case, bemused. It was only then that he realized it was a video game. He chuckled at himself for being so silly. "I'll see if anyone at work would like this. Unless you want it, Norman." Norman meowed and curled up on his lap. To be fair, it's a great single-player experience, but not quite as good as Minesweeper. And leagues away from chess, my god. Those are the only 2 games you'll need for the rest of your life, Norman. Which will probably be whatever the average lifespan of a human is. He's not outstanding in any category, is what we're trying to get at here. Were you picking that up? Next one. Norman finds some wet cement. Norman was walking along the sidewalk, deep in thought about what to have for dinner, when he noticed something off about the paving slab in front of him. Next to it was a large sign that read, "Wet Cement." Norman barely glanced at it. He was suddenly overtaken with an unshakable, insane urge to step into the wet cement. He cautiously looked to the left and then to the right. He craned his neck to check behind him. No one. This was it. He leapt in a joyous moment of unbridled freedom into that wet cement, a canvas for his animalistic freedom. His heart leapt with terrified delight as he turned and saw the footprints left behind in the sidewalk. He quickly returned home, his heart racing and his mind back on dinner. As he stepped into the house, he was met with a familiar, anxious voice. "Norman!" Norman cried out, just having gotten home from work himself, and he scooped up the cat into his arms. "What adventures have you been up to? You're filthy!" Little bit of a flip script. I'm loving this, dude. I don't know if anybody else out there is gonna love this as much as I do, but I just can't stop. I don't have Norman's self-control, okay? I'm gonna read the entire subreddit tonight. Norman gets a call from his son. Oh, finally. It was 9 p.m. on a Thursday, and Norman Jr. had just finished eating at the cafeteria with his friends. They invited him to go to a sports bar, but Norman Jr. politely declined, because he had a class at 8 a.m. the next morning. Upon returning to his dorm room, Norman Jr. laid down on his single bed, reluctantly picked up his cell phone, and searched for Norman's name in the contact list. It had been a while since he had last called his father, and he felt like he should. However, Norman Jr. did not want to call, because he never knew what to talk about with his father. When he called his mom would ramble on about her work projects and ask Norman Jr. all about the girls at school. He found comfort in her voice. With his father, he often found long, awkward pauses in their conversation. "Hey Dad, it's me, Junior." "How's school?" Norman was happy to hear from his son. How's school? It's always the same question from him. "School's alright. What have you been up to?" "Well, not much." There it was. The long pause. You can go first, Dad. "There's a little sandwich shop that opened up down the street, and I'd like to go sometime. Also, Norman keeps falling asleep on the keyboard lately, so that's new." Norman Jr. felt a pang of guilt. Just a simple phone call might have made Norman's day, yet Norman Jr. had been putting it off for so long. He tried to see his father in his mind's eye, a stoic, balding man with weary eyes, edges smoothed down by the weathering of life. He thought about the man who lifted him and spun him around when he was 5. He thought about the man who dragged him out to shoot hoops when his eyes were stuck to a computer screen at age 13. Norman Jr. thought about telling his father about this one girl, Cindy, from class. Instead, he said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, Dad, I learned to make spaghetti the other day, and my friend Spencer showed me a workout regime." Norman remembered the first time he had held Norman Jr. in his arms. He was so tiny, so fragile, so dependent. He remembered feeling as if suddenly nothing else mattered in the world, and he had gained a suit of armor and an Achilles heel all at once. Now that wide-eyed baby is doing a better job of taking care of himself than Norman was, and Norman felt slightly redundant. He then berated himself silently for finding disappointment in his son's success. "If you ever need money or anything, feel free to ask anytime, Junior." Norman Jr. did not have any money issues, but he did need to hear that. Jesus, dude, I think I need to go call my parents or hug my kids or something. Bless you, Norman. Everything about Life of Norman is just wonderful. Kind of mushy oatmeal for your brain, but it feels so good. I sincerely, immensely hope that you guys enjoyed this and that we can do it again and it'll all blow up. But even if that doesn't happen, I mean, maybe I just do this for me, you know? Let me know what you thought in the comments. Like, subscribe, ring the bell, all those things, if you'd be so kind. We've got all sorts of social medias down in the description. Come check me out. Discord, TikTok, Twitter. Them's the place I am most often, aside from YouTube. But also do check out my Patreon, my channel memberships. These people helping me get through some of the hardest months on YouTube. I will thank them again quite shortly by name. But until then, I can only hope that you'll come on back and join us again tomorrow. Keep yourself safe out there, friends. Wash your hands. But most importantly, always remember that you are loved, you are worthy, and you definitely deserve it. I'll see you in the next one, friends. And until then, bye-bye.